We translate global chaos into instructions for capital.
This man was specifically put in place by the shadow elites precisely for this purpose, so that he would make unpopular decisions. And now every single American citizen, every Japanese and every Chinese person will be paying a tax to Iran for the next 50 years. The dollar will be stepping down from its pedestal, and it will happen very quickly. We are waiting with you for crypto to take off right at the beginning of next year. Hello, dear clients, companies, and viewers of our social media channels. Today, we are going to discuss in depth a topic that I have been preparing for a long time, but which, in fact, we have only gradually been able to address together. Today, I will explain what is actually happening right now in politics and the economy, why we are taking certain actions, and what positions in particular we have been sharing over the past few months. So I will share, as they say, the result. First of all, let's look at the results of the week.
Our weekly trading results.
It is quite possible that the most crucial concept of this entire episode will be the following statement, so to speak. Countries have started a global war for leadership, and it's quite a tough one at that. You may be indifferent to this or even think that it doesn't matter at all. But if you haven't realized this yet, you will most likely be physically killed. If you don't understand this, my condolences to your relatives and to you personally. Because at this very particular moment, while you are sitting there thinking that, the farmer has just gone to get another portion of oats. He's already sharpening his knife. You may refuse to accept this, not take it in once again, or say that I'm exaggerating again, but unfortunately, that's not the case. There is a struggle for leadership for the entire 21st century and beyond, and it physically affected you in 2014. You didn't understand it, you didn't even notice it at all. Many people didn't notice it at all, just like an average resident of the USA would never understand how Crimea in 2014 affects him, or how he was affected by Vladimir Putin's Munich speech in 2008. No one really understood this at the time. It will lead to the fact that even this year, life will no longer be the same as before. Now I'll tell you what will happen and how we are preparing for it. In general, remember the article on the website. I posted there that the world was divided into 4 zones. I wrote which country would go into which zone, then which currencies would be used there, how transitions between zones would happen, who would be at war with whom. It was a big article. So for us, that's how it was. The process began. And the first thing that will probably discourage you over the next 6 months, actually I would even say probably a year for the whole world, 6 months for certain zones, is an absolutely fulfilled prediction. The official blocking of YouTube and other social networks in Russia, and the fact that you still have access to them for now, the ability to circumvent these digital restrictions and watch content, even if it means breaking Russian laws, is actually not merely a simple oversight on their part. This is, an intermediate link or a transitional period. So now I'm going to say something quite unexpected and surprising. In Europe, people won't be watching news from the USA. Americans, for example, won't have access to Russian news. And Russians will almost certainly have no access at all to social networks and foreign websites. You say, Nikolai, but you yourself are broadcasting from foreign platforms. Yes, but we work for the whole world. That is, right now we're taking precautions, buying servers in different parts of the world and basically diversifying, spreading out. It's insanely expensive to maintain, but without it, you actually won't be able to see anything at all. We've basically taken precautions on this issue. Well, as for those people who are used to posting something on social networks, watching something there and so on, my friends, get ready for a total shutdown. I want to say that everyone around the world is now looking at the Middle East and thinking that the United States is steadily losing its grip and control over the region. I have even said this myself, that look, the US is leaving the Middle East, meaning that they will eventually leave. Remember our big prediction that they will leave Eurasia? Leaving the state of Israel alone with the Muslim population, which means Israel will be wiped off the face of the earth. Remember I talked about this. So this is the first phase of their withdrawal. But does this mean that the US has lost their... In one of my earlier forecasts, I said something very important. America cannot lose as a nuclear power. Then people didn't understand me. I said, well, they will lose tactically. And that's exactly what happened. This prediction, it's done, it's been fulfilled. In fact, you can say that it has come true. Why are they now, in effect, handing all the trump cards to Iran? It's like they're playing a game of fool and giving them all the best cards. Now they're handing out aces and kings, and they're sitting there satisfied thinking they're winning. And notice, everyone is loudly claiming that they've won. Iran, Israel, and even the US, and most notably the United States, are all insisting that they came out on top. That's it. They've defeated everyone, killed everyone, and everything has worked out for them. At the same time, they've lost a massive amount of highly expensive equipment and people, and effectively surrendered control of the Strait of Hormuz to Iran for permanent use. And now every single American citizen, every Japanese, and every Chinese person will be paying a tax to Iran for the next 50 years. We calculated it. It's about 2 cents per liter, I think, everyone will have to pay. This wasn't the case before, but now it is. And in fact, the United States has lost tactically. So why are they pulling back now? And here comes the crucial point. Drum roll. One that many people don't really understand or realize. If you look at this from a macroeconomic perspective, not from a political one, not like how Netanyahu is shouting right now, "We won," or Trump saying, "We won." When you look at the actual reality of the situation, this unyielding Iran is an ideal instrument for Washington. They require its presence even more, I would say, than even Israel does. You might be surprised by that. Why? Because Iran has been turned into, a convenient Damocles sword, one that hangs over this entire region. And it's a primary reason to distribute and sell weaponry in order to exert influence and maintain strategic control. Israel is carefully managed and kept on a very tight leash. It serves as a reason to periodically remind everyone why that petrodollar pact is so necessary, which I discussed briefly, I think, just a couple of episodes ago. Accordingly, the military conflicts happening today, that are going on over there, are nothing more than a big smokescreen. For solving fundamental economic issues, like I said, if you look from the perspective of the global economy, then global economic problems. This is the main problem for the US, it's not Israel or Iran at all. Right now they have a substantial military presence in the Middle East, as you already know, and they're spending a lot of resources on it. But basically, these are just unnecessary sacrifices for them. Their biggest problem is debt. It's what hangs over their economy as an enormous, enormous burden. They need to somehow resolve all this, to write off these debts onto someone. That's why this major effort is underway. Basically, for those of you watching us from the US, understand that your economy is in serious trouble and there is no other option. For the US, the only way to solve it is to start a global war. There is no other way. This is something you need to know. That's all there is to it. And that means you will be mobilized. In other words, you will be drafted into the army. You haven't seen anything like this since the Vietnam era. But Trump will do it. This man was specifically put in place by the shadow elites, precisely for this purpose, so that he would make unpopular decisions. He was needed for this. And here it should be noted that, of course, they will be the ones making the decisions. All of this is not exclusively military forces, because military forces require money and there isn't any. And it's no coincidence that this truce and everything else happening now is a reloading of weapons. There are no munitions, there is no way to throw the same forces at Iran, meaning to put it in a less advantageous position. That's why they handed them the trump cards and went to reload their weapons, so that in the next act of this theater, they could stage an even bloodier battle in this region and essentially do what they are trying to do. And the second most significant financial weapon, which Donald Trump loaded, remember he was signing the legislation with a very satisfied look on his face. These are what we call stablecoins. What is that? I have consistently warned you about this in previous programs. This is a tool for completely and utterly uncontrolled debt accumulation and money printing. To put it in much simpler terms, whereas before the United States of America would lend to sovereign countries like Japan, Russia, China, or even the Saudis, now they will lend not to countries, but to each and every individual citizen of each of these countries. And for this, a unique tool has emerged, a product of the digital world. Let's put it this way. It's a stablecoin tied to this debt with the debt embedded inside it. And they will print these stablecoins for these private companies in a completely uncontrolled manner and distribute them all over the world, inflating their debt to absolutely phenomenal proportions. So what will this be? It will be uncontrolled, powerful, and rapid inflation all over the world. Why? Well, because if people start switching to this stablecoin, abandoning their own currencies from time to time or in certain places, even sporadically, that alone will be enough to multiply the current debt several times over. That's why we have to talk about this here. So for them, the first thing is the military, and the second is this. Why am I saying all this right now? Because I want to explain the deals. In other words, where to put your money and why. Because if people don't have a justification, they'll say, well, what's the practical benefit for me, right? But when I explain it, people immediately understand, aha, So there's nothing for us to do here. And then fundamentally, we always turn out to be right. Always.
Check out our regular reports in the Realized Forecast section on the Era of Change website.
Now, a very important disclaimer. I am recording this in the morning, and we have a new head of the Federal Reserve who will be speaking in the evening, and the interest rate will also be announced, at least according to our time. I don't have the opportunity. Let's put it this way. I can't warn you in advance, but the fact that oil has dropped to around 78, and right now, according to my chart, 78 is the minimum, this is pure manipulation. I have to warn you, albeit after the fact, that maybe by the time you watch this, oil will have already reversed. But the very fact that the Federal Reserve meeting is happening now, this is going to be quite a circus. They will try to strategically outplay, outmaneuver, and hide their official statistics. They have already announced that they will not disclose their true intentions. They won't speak about these matters openly, and instead they'll keep everything secret, and then in the end deliver their decisive blow. What is all this for? Because they have no good moves left. They can't lower the rate because that would immediately cause inflation or even hyperinflation, especially if it's done quickly. That would be the end, plus the market is already at its peak. I remind you, the forecast is that the rate will reach 2.5%. So we expect that the bottom for the rate decrease is 2.5%. They have a margin of 1.5% downwards. So accordingly, they can't act abruptly. They will have to hold the rate and gradually let off pressure, and in this way somehow support the markets. But at the same time, they also can't raise the rate significantly. Inflation is already above 4%, and right now the biggest misconception is this. Not everyone realizes that this is because the Armutsky Strait was blocked. Actually, that's not the real reason for such inflation. In reality, this inflation is even based on their new calculation method. Let me remind you, they calculate inflation differently every time. Sometimes they include essential goods in the calculation, sometimes they exclude them, and they count all sorts of nonsense that nobody actually buys. In this way, they try to manipulate these numbers to justify new money printing, various repos, and so on and so forth. There are tons of mechanisms. So as of today, even with their flawed calculations, there's still a huge gap. 4%, and they wanted 2.5%, but they just can't reach it. At one point, I think they had 3% at the lowest, and that was it. That's it, 3 to 3.5%. That's why the problem is big right now, and they're going to keep playing around with people and with the general public using this new head of the Fed. But overall, I don't think he'll bring any real or significant changes because, let me remind you, the Fed is an institution that responds to major events. That is, first, there's some political event, for example, an atomic bomb strike on Iran, or chemical weapons, or bacteriological weapons, and only then, maybe nuclear, just as I warned you about before. And now it turns out that they will be reacting to this event. So at this point, it really doesn't make any difference to us, which is why you can just ignore all these Fed rate decisions. Just like that, turn a blind eye and pay absolutely no attention to what they're talking about or what he's warning about. Because all these meetings only last for about an hour or 2 or 3. When the public starts absorbing the news, volatility spikes by 0.5 point in the moment, and that's it. We close out at that point. After that, we continue on the path we were on. They don't change the trend. So now, when we discuss individual stocks, market trends, and specific trades, I want to take a moment to warn you right away against sitting glued to the screen watching every single price movement. I have to do this as a necessary part of my daily job, but you really don't need to do it yourself, honestly. Now, regarding interest rates and so on. My forecast here is simple. I am forced to make a prediction that you probably already know because the time has come. I think they won't lower or raise the rate. Basically, they'll leave it unchanged. But let me remind you that at the end of the year, in November, there are elections in America, and Trump, no matter what, desperately needs a strong market by that time. Even if he has to take some action with Iran a bit earlier, meaning now in July, August, or September, he will need that rate cut. That's why my forecast is that by the end of the year, they will lower the rate, maybe even down to 2.5. This will be a response to the Strait incident that we are expecting. The first one. So my consensus forecast for this year and the beginning of next year is that they will gradually start lowering the rate, but this won't inject a lot of money into the economy yet. It will only fuel so-called speculative expectations. Every financial dip in the market will be completely covered by this printing press, at least in terms of news. And in fact, the consequences will inevitably lead to the entire system cracking and breaking apart. I would even say this is happening on a global scale. And then inflation will accelerate. That's essentially what all this will lead to, and the entire system as well. And then, as I already mentioned, when they reach 2.5%, they will sharply and significantly raise the rate, almost up to 10%. Because the dollar will start to lose its primary function, and they will take immediate action to put a stop to it. This will happen a bit later, most likely, but we are certainly expecting it. That will be afterwards. After the forecasted period that we are discussing today, it is quite evident that they will abruptly slam on the brakes. That much is clear to me. There will be significant and massive turbulence throughout the financial markets. I'm absolutely certain of that. Now, regarding the recent downward dip in the buying of various American stocks. Right now, I mostly see people trading. That's a colossal mistake. Many investors are sitting there now, waiting for a correction so they can buy American stocks cheaper from the S&P 500 and so on. People here love to buy up tech giants right now. That's the situation. On the one hand, it sounds logical, but on the other hand, in reality, this is actually a tragedy for these people in the future. At the peak of the bubble, this is a classic bubble. People are already buying these high-tech stocks without even understanding why, just so they don't miss out. The PE ratios there are so high that even your grandchildren would have enough. That's why I think there's nothing to do there. And my opinion is this. During this big, massive drawdown, I will only be increasing my positions. That's gold, that's silver, that's companies related to energy, for example, uranium. These are resources, including water resources, again because of the energy sector. Well, and in general, a lot of other things as well. I provided a list on our website and also released it in a private video. But basically, for those of you who don't want to subscribe, these are ETFs for such companies. And these are individual companies, the flagships of these industries. So why is that? Now I'm going to explain all of this and also talk about my current positions and why.
Visit the Era of Change website or app to subscribe using credit cards or cryptocurrency.
For now, I'm in hard assets, in gold, the one I bought, you remember, 4 years ago. And I was telling everyone that you need to buy gold, right? If real estate drops several times, it means there will be currency devaluation and so on and so forth. So for now, I'm sticking to my position. Why? I explained earlier. Because interest rates will either fall or remain neutral, and that means inflation. And all this inflation will be absorbed by gold and our forecasts for gold. You've seen the latest ones on the website. The targets are still to surpass the current highs. That's probably where I'll be taking profits and exiting. Why? Because of course I'm expecting a major reversal in the dollar. As they say, you keep waiting and waiting for it, but it just doesn't happen. Yes, it just doesn't happen. For a year and a half, the DXY index, not the dollar ruble I emphasize, but the DXY index has been in consolidation. And when it breaks out, no one will be left unaffected, because it will wipe out all the gains made over the past year. It will happen almost instantly. And I think even the gains of the last 2 to 3 years. So we're looking at a 50 to 60% correction in the market overall. Plus, I think that in a panic, we could see the correction reach even greater levels. But for now, the consensus forecast, which was given back in November 2025, is by the end of 2026, the beginning of 2027, I said that by the end of the first quarter of 2027, the S&P would be at 4,000. Well, since that's the case, I stand by my position. I continue to hold my hedge on my oil position, and currently I am holding oil, and I have regulatory approval for the most part. Well, at least in a certain sense. I continue to hold these positions in a hedge through the use of protective put options on the S&P 500. So there's no trick here, nothing special. This is just standard work for a fund manager. That is, assets are bought with a certain expectation for some event, yes, like dividend companies, for example. And then a put option is bought if, for example, by a certain date as insurance against some event. This scheme has been working for decades in all companies, banks, and so on. So why can't we use it? So I use it and wait. And accordingly, we are waiting with you for crypto to take off right at the beginning of next year. I talked about this at the beginning of this year, while everyone was waiting when everyone was waiting for alt season in the fall, I said, there won't be any season, calm down, not until they start printing. If they don't print money like crazy, you won't see any alt seasons. And so I think that right around the beginning of 2027, when they finally start up the printing press, that's when the first absorption of liquidity will happen. That's where it will be. I'll say right away, many of you won't even be able to take advantage of this because cryptocurrency market regulation is coming. So I'm warning you about this, and we are actively preparing for it as well. We're switching to legal frameworks and so on. To summarize the current situation, we are expecting inflation, and we are expecting significant and major global upheavals, geopolitical ones, the continued escalation of war in the Middle East, the ongoing implementation of sanctions against Russia, a blow to Russia, and the deliberate dragging of the nation into a European war on Ukrainian territory. As I said, certain NATO countries will be involved against Russia on Ukrainian territory. This will happen this year. We also have El Niño, this climate anomaly, the heat. It has come in full force, hitting the harvests hard. All of this is happening at the same time. So basically everything is piling up, just add it all up. Social networks are being blocked and Europe is introducing passports. A lot is happening now. From what I've already told you, let's not repeat ourselves.
For your convenience, we've introduced dark mode. Better eye comfort with just one click.
So, if there is a market pullback, I think that's exactly when you should be adding to the positions I mentioned, because there will be a deflationary shock. The DXY index, I said my forecast is 120. And right after this deflationary shock, we will see an inflationary shock due to money printing, the launch of these so-called stablecoins, rising debt, and the loss of America's primacy. As a funding currency, in other words, the dollar will be stepping down from its pedestal, and it will happen very quickly. Here, the most important thing is safety precautions and being careful. I'm going to mention it now. It's obvious to many, but most people simply don't realize it. They don't recognize it. When you are about to buy some assets now, for example, gold or silver, although I never recommend buying physical silver, there's a lot of hassle with it, as they say. For example, Bitcoin or something else. Crypto, by the way, is king here because it's convenient, especially Bitcoin, when the crash finally happens, which we expect to be much lower. In my interviews on several programs on other channels, I've talked about this. I've said it before, it's no secret. I expect the bottom to be somewhere around 40,000 or even lower, the bottom. And even if you buy it there, you absolutely can't keep it on the exchange. Because at that moment when there are such drops and so on, banks and exchanges will be shutting down. They'll be freezing accounts, postponing transactions. In general, for you, it's a critical condition to hold assets physically. If it's Bitcoin, then keep it on your own cold wallet. If it's gold, then literally have it in your hand. If it's, for example, real estate, okay, it might lose value, but at least it will preserve some of its worth and you'll be able to sell it in tough times. And so, following that same logic, if you are already used to accumulating your wealth in this specific manner, then you definitely need to keep on purchasing these assets right at the peak of this hysteria, because people will be exiting their own currency. Switching to these stable coins and so on, there will be a lot of chaos there. And just so you don't lose your capital due to transaction fees, broker bankruptcies, or something else, this is how you insure yourself. Accordingly, it needs to be explained. I have explained why this will happen, because politicians are tearing the world apart. I've explained how this will happen. It will be through the devaluation of assets, especially fiat currencies first and foremost. I've explained what will geopolitically trigger the storm, and by the way, this prediction has already come true. This is precisely the Iranian knot. It will continue to play a role. Don't think that everything is over there. By the way, here's a small piece of advice. Listen up. For those of you who are still in Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and so on, you should really take full advantage of these ceasefires. This is because when investors now think that everything is finally over and rush to invest their money there, you might even come out ahead. But since you have the forecast in front of you that there is actually nothing over there, you'll be able to preserve your investment capital this way. And honestly, there is one major reason why I wouldn't even consider living in that desert at all. Let me explain. Because dehydration and climate change will continue and it will become physically impossible to live there. They're forecasting 60 degrees Celsius in the shade all year round. Just imagine physically what it would be like living in that. In some kind of modern complex, I don't know, maybe a trendy glass one, where your air conditioner has to run non-stop day and night, 365 days a year, simply because it's just, well, you know, the sand will turn into glass. It will be literal hell on earth there. And that is exactly why I don't consider them for any purely logical or rational reasons. No desalination plants will save you. It's an ecological disaster zone. So if there are still people who are like, oh, we'll go there, the taxes are better, or something else, or whatever else, please, here's a great opportunity to give them that property. Let them take it. And you yourself should come to the green zone, where it's a bit cooler, there's more water, and there's nature. Because after all, we are not separated from nature. People have forgotten that, and unfortunately they think they can just pick up and leave at any moment. But that's not the case. Practice has shown the next round of military actions. Airports will close again in 60-degree heat without water or food. You'll be stuck there just sitting. Right now, Many people, including partners, are inviting me to come there. They're practically promising me a golden visa. No, friends, my answer is unequivocal to everyone. I'm not setting foot there. It's the toughest place on the planet for the next 30 years on Earth. There will be wars, heat, dehydration, and death there. And the only thing they will come to, my prediction is the same, they will turn back into Bedouin tribes fighting among themselves. And all of this benefits the Americans, Israel, and everyone else. Everyone wants one thing: for them to start killing each other in an interconfessional, intra-religious war. Sunnis against Shiites. That's what they're heading towards. That's why they're inflating Iran, giving it the opportunity to recharge. That's why all of this is being done there, and that's why they'll pit it against Israel, so it can seize territory there. First one side, then the other. And then I certainly wouldn't want this, but judging by everything, the same thing will happen with Turkey. They might even push it that far. Because all these events, the situation in Lebanon and various other regional conflicts, are the actual physical manifestation of the deep-seated desires of a small but very proud people, called the Jews, who will relentlessly try to push forward even over the bodies of others, while conquering and seizing new land. Of course, this is madness. How can 3 million Jews defeat 100 million Turks? Of course not. It's an insane asylum. They'll get, that's all there is to it. But the desire to fight and kill there, I see, is simply colossal. So great that they simply can't stop themselves. And now they have a leader who encourages them in every possible way, and his entire power is based mainly on this. Well, that is just how it appears if you look at things completely objectively, without any orders and without wearing any rose-colored glasses. If you remember at the beginning, I'll finish with what I started with. If you don't understand that the state is now dividing spheres of influence and any informational, it's a military, let's say, instrument, because now the media is an instrument, and if you don't realize that, you're putting yourself and your children essentially in direct danger. In the final, desperate stages of holding on to power, and not just by Putin, but by a wide range of other politicians around the world, they will inevitably try to go against the very societies they govern. Because the final phase of holding on to power is always the most terrifying for ordinary people. Many Americans, well, Americans watching us right now, might think that this doesn't concern them, and that they have a stable democracy. People across Europe will think, yes, everything is perfectly fine for us too. But remember, a few people were killed in Europe, and there were elections, remember, the midterms. So let us take a moment to find that specific news story. I'll post it here. A few people were simply eliminated. Look at how people disappear in the United States of America. What's happening there? Look at what Russia is doing. Look at what they do to citizens who, from abroad, are doing something. As for other countries like America and Europe, I'll say that the situation is very similar, except in the US the racial issue still hasn't been resolved. And I think it will explode there too. In fact, it's Southerners and Northerners. This is an old conflict and it still exists. It's still simmering. And this Democratic Republican Party in reality is just Northerners and Southerners. They had a war and there will be another one. The only question is when and in what form. I think they'll be smart enough to make it more or less manageable. But Europe, well, that's quite straightforward. Most of the population is docile. They're trying to get them under arms, but it won't work out well for them. Europe will be torn apart by social inequality. And prepare yourselves, dear residents of Europe, for the coming migrant lawlessness. The real thing, full-blown, complete with weapons. You let them in yourselves. You let them come in while completely disregarding their underlying principles, their potential, so to speak, in various areas. And now you'll get what you'll get. This is, in fact, a natural consequence. That's all I wanted to say for today. I really hope that today's episode came across, in a realistic way, so that, God forbid, you don't think that someone is trying to unnecessarily frighten you just to sell you something. Our goal is to give you as much information as possible, and only those people who really need to dive deep into the market to understand what, where, and how, they already come to us. We're in touch with all of you. Until next week, friends, goodbye.
We're giving away 3 website subscriptions every month. Just 2 simple steps. Subscribe, leave a comment, and you're in.